Okay, so welcome to our second session of the day for day one of the Open Future Forum. I'm Jamaica Stevens. I'm the co-founder of Open Future Coalition, and this is an incredible joy and honor to host this incredible convening of minds and souls and experts and incredible practitioners and folks doing really beautiful and relevant work and necessary work. Part of the Open Future Coalition is a harvesting culmination of this incredible ecosystem that we've been cultivating and all of these rich partners and efforts over the last 2 years. And obviously for many of us, it's lifetimes converging. Many efforts coming to a moment of incredible potential and also demand, a very crisis-filled moment in a lot of ways, watching existing both physical built environment structures crumbling, but also watching ecology that was born and birthed out of billions of years of evolution that's now hitting another flux point, and we're in a moment of incredible shift in the ecologies and the biosphere. And so this sort of intersection of the relationship between our human built environments and societies and the realities of what is a natural evolving biosphere system, but then our impact on that and the way that we're advancing and amplifying these wild volatilities that are deeply impacting not only sort of the built environment, but our economic and our social systems are being just honestly ravaged. And one thing that I've been very aware of is I don't feel like we're as prepared to bring resilience and support communities of place to have the resilience that they need to face these challenges. I feel like there are giant gaps in really the resourcing and support of leadership. Sorry, I'm gonna mute. But I've been very concerned for a long time as a global citizen, as a mother, as somebody who's paying attention to how much disparity there is in these systems that are meant to shore up and support times of change and ensure that people continue to have the resourcing and support they need as these mass migrations for all many reasons, political, economic, social, and ecological, are barreling down on communities. I don't feel like many communities are being supported enough to have the resilience that we need to face these times with any agility and to be able to rebound and rebuild and navigate these changes. So when the opportunity to partner and support the work of particularly Kevin and Shivani came, I knew that we had to have this as one of our first and foremost sessions. It's an incredibly important topic. And the way that they frame this idea from refugee of displacement, I think it's very important to also have the right kind of conversation. So I'm with that going to hand this off in your moment here for Shivani to help moderate this conversation and welcome our additional panelists. But I did want to, before we go into that, I did want to thank our convening partners and just acknowledge those who've helped bring the forum together. So I do want to acknowledge the American Sustainable Business Network, Bluefin Investment, Eco Restoration Alliance, El Puente, Global Unity, Guild of Future Architects, Heartland P5, Imagine World, Institute of Ecotechnics, Intergen Family, Kinship Earth, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical Institute, and State University, Partnerships for Change, Pro-Social World, Reconsider, Toxic Free Future for Our Children, Triangle Foundation, and obviously United Refugee and Pathfinders. With that, I just want to introduce Shivani Singh, who's going to be our moderator for this session, who is with Pathfinders, and I'm very excited to allow you to take the reins of this conversation, introduce the rest of the panelists, and guide us on this particular journey. Thank you so much, Shivani. We have you on mute, dear.
Great start. It's obviously evening here where I am in Amsterdam. Hi, thank you for this very, very generous introduction. I'm actually just happy to be participating. I don't believe any kind of an expert in these matters, but I am always trying to learn. So I'm really, really happy to be here. So what I think I might do is a quick introduction of who I am, and then just sort of talk a little bit about what we'd like to do this session. And then it would be really cool if the other panelists could also sort of pop in and introduce themselves, and we can take it from there. So Just to start, my name is Shivani. I am the co-founder of this company called Pathfinder. We are a sustainable development consultancy. We are now a 2-time B Corp, and most recently, actually, we got one of the world's top 3 scores in governance, which is very, very cool. Who doesn't love acing an exam? So that's the latest on our showing off status. But my business partner, Jess, and I, we began Pathfinder when we did, because we were both quite disillusioned with the way systems worked or didn't. And we wanted to challenge everything that didn't work and partner with people who wanted to bring about change. So really, we like to say we were working on systemic change before it was a buzz concept in the industry. We actually have a trademarked model of engagement where we've championed working with boots on the ground, social entrepreneurs, academics and policymakers at once, so that we can sort of enable and scale change. But that's enough about Pathfinder. Before I found my way to Pathfinder, my background, my career was actually originally from investment banking tech. I like to say I grew up on Wall Street, which was a really, really cool time. I always look at it so fondly. Spent 10 years over there, and then when I was ready for the move, I moved into the development industry, and I tried to learn everything I could about aid and development. One of the contracts I'm currently working on is I'm with MSF in Amsterdam, which of course is a humanitarian aid organization. So really the goal here for me is to keep on learning. And one of our big priorities is, of course, the global refugee and displaced populations crisis, because it's been something that we haven't been paying attention to for decades. We've seen this sort of grow. We've known it will grow. We know it'll get a lot worse. But unfortunately, what we've seen is a lot of political lobbying of problems and a lot less sort of finding solutions or coming to solutions together. And that's how this whole conversation with Jamaica and Kevin and Caitlin, that's how we began. One of the things we'd like to do, we're trying to work on a paper that sort of investigates, public, private, and interagency partnerships coming together to build solutions that'll really sort of deliver much needed salve to this global displacement crisis. That's where this conversation came from. I think before I go into anything else, one of the things I'd really like if we could sort of try to focus on is, it would be really neat if we could keep this conversational, I thought, because it's really always cool to have people sort of jumping in and out with ideas, collectively think through things. I love when we can do that. And of course, our goal here is to sort of keep solutions oriented. I mean, it's hard because we're surrounded by so much. Like even in the Netherlands where I currently am, I mean, it's their agencies are a mess, and they're being asked by the courts to step it up immediately, and so it's really hard to get your head out of just the enormity of the problem and focus on solutions. But it would be really cool if we did that, and we could sort of talk about what works, what doesn't, well, little less of what doesn't, but what works, why it would work, how it could scale, and so on. So that was just a quick, I think, introduction to the next hour and 20 maybe. And yeah, so with that, if it's all right, I'd like to also introduce Kevin really quickly, because Kevin and I have been powwowing on some of this stuff as well. So Kevin, how do you feel about going next?
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So my name is Kevin Rowell, and I've worked as a consultant with Open Future Coalition, and I've also been part of their incubation cohort for years now, since it was a small child a few years ago, and as it's developed. And what I love about it is I came with a question to Jamaica and my friends at United Refuge and said, my heart's broken. I've been working in natural building and environmental construction for many, over 2 decades. And most of my work, the most relevant place for a lot of this environmental construction work was in refugee camps and in post-disaster recovery. And it really broke my heart open. And I think through the process of working with the Open Future Coalition family and incubating this idea, that's how United Refuge was born, which is our current project. There's about 30 of us who have worked in international aid and development, many of us, including myself, for UN agencies and other US government and other big entities, and see that there's a massive gap between what we think is happening with big entities and organizations like FEMA, et cetera, and what actually happens on the ground, which is that your community, your neighbors, and your friends are the only ones who are really able to help you, and they're the most effective at it. And so that's where I think my conversation or contribution can come in helpful for those who have questions about how those big agencies work or don't, or how to make them work, and then how we leverage them for communities. So I'm excited to be here and see some familiar faces, and like very, very excited to get to know some new folks, not just today, but over the week. Shivani and Jamaica and I, when we were talking, one thing that we've done in the past to really try and get everyone involved is this concept of a ping pong conversation or a tennis conversation, rather than each of us going on for too long. So I'm going to invite everyone, we're here to hear everyone. We want everyone to get their thoughts across, including folks like myself who can trail on. But if we can, try to think in a few sentences and then pass the hat. So for example, I'm very excited to learn a little bit more about our friend Bahati, who was invited in. And so
that's actually a great segue, Kevin. I was going to say, Bahati, I'm really, really excited to have him. And before we jump into conversation, I'd like to introduce Bahati, who I met. I feel like a long time ago in New York when we were at an event with American Express Leadership Academy and Ashoka. And I think I can confidently say that I have never been able to have a conversation with Bahati where I haven't just ended up in tears. So today is going to be a new challenge for me, Bahati. We're gonna do this without crying today. Bahati has the most inspiring and just incredible story. I'm not going to give any of it away. I think he should be the one to introduce himself in entirety. But I also think that it is really important that we have Bahati and others like Bahati in these discussions, because it's really, really important that we conduct discussions that are not just diverse, but involve the very people we are sort of, discussing or talking about, or wanting to help, or wanting to engage with, or wanting to work for, whatever it is. It's not enough to just be diverse in terms of representation from various places, but really, if we are going to talk about displaced populations, it's going to be very, very important that we give a lot of weight to people who have themselves had to live the lives of refugees or migrants and so on. So without saying any more, welcome Bahati, and you're gonna have to give us the whole story, because it's far too powerful to skip.
Thank you, Shivani, for the invitation, and thank you, everyone. It's nice meeting new folks here. I think Shivani was too nice to talk about me, but I call myself just a boy from the refugee camp. That's my definition, and it's been a humbling experience for me. My colleague Benson used to say that we are in a university of learning, which we would never learn from anywhere. But to be brief, my name is Bahati Kanyamanza. I'm Associate Director of Partnerships with Asylum Access. Asylum Access is a human rights organization focusing on advocating for the rights of displaced people around the world. I'm a co-founder of CIOTA, which is an acronym for Koborowasi International Youth Organization, to transform Africa. Briefly, I think my story is too long, but I try to cut it short. I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And when I was 14, I found myself in the refugee camp in Uganda when the systems in Congo failed to work, and then we had conflicts in which everybody was trying to escape from violence. In the refugee camp, life wasn't easy. I remember telling Shivani about my flight abduction as a young boy, seeing my other friends, the young boys who could not be able to continue to work for the rebels with a lot of energy. They were just murdered in our eyes, including one of my best friends. So I became a refugee at 14 as a young boy. I had my own dreams in the Congo, but also coming to a refugee camp was kind of a safe haven where we are not experiencing bullets and bombs or witnessing abduction, raping of our sisters and our mothers. But also the refugee camp had its own unique challenges: access to education, health, and other problems, poverty. And that's why my friends and I came up with an organization to help young people access education. I think for me, this is a critical topic for me to participate in. I have always done my best to share my story and how this means to me and also the millions of displaced people. I was in Geneva actually last week, and the High Commissioner stated that we are over now 100 million of displaced people. And now the question is what is going to be happening in the next few years with the conflict in Ukraine, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, and all these other places. So I think this is a topic which we cannot ignore. Whether we agree or not, this conflict affects us. I was a refugee in Uganda. I came to the US, where some folks feel like we shouldn't be here, but we are here. In Africa, we used to have a saying that when our neighbor's house is on fire, we are not sure how safe ours is. And I usually tell my American friends that we have to play our part in making sure that other places have the peace they need, so that we don't need to see them in our neighborhood or in our environment if we don't want them to be near us. I'll be happy to answer questions and be part of this conversation. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Shivani, back to you.
Sure, super, Bahati, that was way too short. But I'm feeling some tears. You bring up some of the stories and I'm like, oh God, here it is. Okay, thank you so much, Bahati. Next, I'm going to introduce Jack as well. Jack, who has joined us from Namibia, I believe. And we would, sorry, Jamaica, did I get the place wrong?
That's okay, yeah, Nairobi area in Kenya.
Sorry about that. Nairobi. And Jack, I believe that you are also working with displacement, with everything that's going on right now in Kenya with the floods and everything. And we would love also for you to introduce yourself. And we're so excited that, we have you joining us today.
Thank you so much, Shivani. Thank you so much, Jamaica, Bahati, and the rest of us. This is such a wonderful forum, and I really feel at home seeing Bahati. So I know I have one of our own trying to also explain what happens on the other side of the world. I met Jamaica sometimes back, and it has been really wonderful to share my stories with her. And through her, I've been given a platform again to share my stories with other people. I come from Kenya. Kenya is a country in the east part of Africa, a country that suffers a lot. We're very lucky that we've not faced quite a number of conflict, but our conflict basically is around politics, where every 5 years people have to die because the will of people is subverted because of individual interest. This is a country whereby our leaders do not care so much about, us, but them. Our institutions have been compromised, whether from the judiciary, organizations fighting for human rights and all that. But all that is centered around poverty. So I come from the western sides of Kenya, where it's called Nyanza in Kenya, former Nyanza province. I come from around Lake Victoria, if you've heard about Lake Victoria. And that is a place that has been so much affected by culture, poverty, and all that you can mention. Now, we used to experience floods ever since I was a young boy. We've been experiencing floods, but again, back then it used to come as a blessing, and people will, want to know when will it flood again. As I can really recall, it used to happen around April and maybe towards December. For the last 5 years, that was from 2015 onwards, I got curious and I wanted to know what was happening, because the floods were no longer coming as a blessing. Remember, they used to come as a blessing, whereby whenever it flooded, there was a lot of food in terms of fish. My community depend heavily on fishing. So whenever it flooded, there was a lot of fish. So that meant there was a lot of food and people would not starve to eat. But again, from 2015 onwards, something curious started happening, whereby, the flood waters will reach areas where people will not expect that they will reach. But again, because of the culture that is still holding us hostages, people try to relate that to culture, whereby, the elderly in the village, they're consulted, they talk about, the gods being angry with us, we need to appease the gods, we need to do some form of sacrifices and all that. So being a young person who is a bit informed about what was happening, I got curious and I wanted to know what is happening. So I started visiting the elderly people in the village, people who had lived way long before me. There is this old man who's about 90 years by around 2015. So when I went to him, he told me that what was happening before was a blessing, but what is happening now, we don't understand, because we've tried appeasing the gods. We've tried offering every form of sacrifices that we can to appease the gods, but nothing is happening. That is how I got curious. So I wanted to know. So from then, the floods have been so much frequent. People have been dying. People have been drowned. Homes taken away. Children are being left behind. And that has brought a lot of problems. I think I had PowerPoint presentation. I showed that to Jamaica about the state of things in the community, where people, are just drowning. People are getting used to it. The government is doing very little about it. Nothing's happening. So I took that initiative to try and, start, talking to people about what is happening, the real issues about climate change, the floods that we experience. Currently, right now, as I speak to you, people are dying out of, famine. Children are going to school. I have close to around 20 to 25 children that I take care of, that they don't have homes, they don't have parents, they don't have anything, they don't have anybody to rely on. And this is because of, climate-related, catastrophe, that is floods and, and famine and, drought, So I got inspired. I live in Nairobi, but I go to the village most of the time. The reason as to why I can't live in the village was because people reverted to sand harvesting, and I tried to stop that. And the village ganged against me that I was stopping the only source of income. So I also had to flee for my life. So I try to visit occasionally and I come back to Nairobi. So the same thing happens again in Nairobi, because in Nairobi, I also live in an informal settlement that is called Kibera slums. I don't know whether you know about that. Kibera is one of the largest slums in the world. So the same thing was happening. It is poverty here, poverty in the village. And again, people are very much less informed about issues climate change. So I started an initiative of trying to educate people, where I will go to public buses in the morning, take advantage of the traffic, jams, talk to people, the buses, try to gauge how much do they know about issues climate change, what mitigating measures can they do at the individual levels. Yeah, so that is what I've been doing. I've been growing trees. I call it tree growing, not planting, because I want to grow them and see them mature to, survive to maturity. And luckily enough, we've done close to around between 3,000 to 5,000 trees now, with 80% survival rate. We have it documented of some form of, an Excel sheet where I follow through about that. I've also come up with another campaign. If I'll show you my t-shirt, if I stand up, you'll see there's something like children by choice, not by chance. Basically what is happening, because of poverty related, issues, people tend to have children here, not because they plan for them, but because they cannot avoid it. For example, if I will ask you, Shivani, what time do you go to bed? Maybe you'll tell me you go to bed after midnight, you'll go to bed maybe around 10 p.m. in the evening. And if I'll ask you why, you'll give me quite a number of reasons. Maybe you have a TV program that you want to watch, you're waiting for. If you're a soccer fan like me, maybe you're waiting to watch maybe your favorite soccer team play. Maybe you're waiting for food, dinner, came late, maybe you're storing with friends. But if you try to imagine a situation whereby you don't have electricity, you don't have the food, you don't have any source of entertainment, you don't have anything that can keep you awake up to that time, then what happens here, people tend to go to bed early because night has come, they have nothing to do, so they're forced to go to bed. And whenever they go to bed, the only thing that comes to their mind is to make babies, So what happens, they have children, by chance, not by choice. So I've been trying to work with young people and trying to reduce the burden that I have of taking care of children, that do not have, places to call home, they do not have places to, people to call parents, they don't have people, they don't have food, they have, all kinds. So I'm trying to avoid that by involving young people, training them on abstinence, training them on issues, contraceptives and all that, trying to make them busy by our green regenerative actions, growing trees, doing syntropic farming and all sorts of things to keep them busy, at least to again let them forget about the problems that they're going through, that has also made quite a number of them go and start abusing drugs. So basically that is what I'm doing. I founded a community-based organization that is called Towards Green Environment, that offers me a platform to do all that. So thank you so much. Like Bahati said, for the issues of conflicts, we've seen it. It is just about close to a month since we held our general elections, which was compromised, and there was a lot of political instability around the country. People fighting, people dying, and all that. And our leaders are not informed. About a week ago, our deputy president just gave an order to allow farmers to access the forest reserves for farming. He also gave an order. He went to a TV, a radio vernacular station, and talked about, people should give birth the way they want, and yet we cannot sustain that. So that brings me to a situation whereby our leaders, people that want to entrust our lives with, do not care about our future, do not care about the future of our children. So we are trying to do what we can at individual levels to try to subvert that. Thank you so much, Jamaica. Thank you so much, Shivani, for offering me the platform to talk. Thank you so much.
Jack, thank you so much for sharing your story. When we met, because the internet allows us to do such things and meet people globally, I just felt like such a kinship when I heard your entire story, but you're only sharing parts. but it is absolutely devastating and heartbreaking to watch the compounding crises where you already have communities that are struggling with poverty and economic disadvantage and social and political issues. And then you layer in, you are already a climate activist trying to educate people about pollution and about, the benefits of creating, syntrophic agroforestry to create food resilience and food forests and community wellness that's based on the foundation of healthy food systems. When in your own community, the exorbitant amount of flooding imbalanced by the very thing that you're activating and trying to educate and be an activist around in your community, that sort of an incredible layering of crises after crises after crises is so traumatizing. And yet my experience of you has been that you are a diligent warrior and devoted, dedicated community steward, doing everything you can. But the point that is always brought up to me is that the government isn't helping. You're getting very little handouts. So you're taking people who are already working, as subsistence farmers and in village communities that are still finding a way to flourish. And when these disasters or issues strike, you are being even less capable of rebound. And then what you've told me is because of that, scarcity of available resources to rebound, the compounding crises of continuing to degrade the very environment that continues to sort of compound. So you see these like compounding crises. And part of the conversation is, how do we start turning the tide towards a cascading benefit? How do we start getting out of that cycle where it just gets worse and worse and worse, particularly for communities who are already underserved and already struggling? What are those mechanisms and resources to help bring and shore up people like Jack and community leaders to be resilient, to know how to guide the necessary sort of process once you have a disaster strike, to be able to rebound and rebuild that creates, cascading benefit. So Jack's story to me is one of what I recognize are hundreds of thousands. And here's the other thing is, it's not just sort of a global South issue. Now we have Ukraine, who we had a couple of folks from Ukraine that were going to come, but now all of a sudden, like, oh, okay, so in Europe, like what starts to happen too is we have this like othering that tells the story that these issues of displacement are somewhere out there in a less resourced environment. But then my mother is literally living in the direct hit path of Hurricane Ian, and her entire community was just destroyed. And by grace, the eye of the storm passed literally over her neighborhood, but everything around her is destroyed. And the amount of rebound and resourcing that we've poured into Ukraine, or poured into sort of these places that get attention, like, the United States, those communities are still facing the trauma, the displacement, the lack of resource, the need to rebuild, like all of these issues. And yet they're privileged. They're already supported. Thousands and millions of people around the world will pour tons of money into those regions to support the rebuild of those communities. And yet other communities are blind, are not visible, are not having their stories told, are struggling without the ability to outreach and say, we're here too, we matter, our children matter, our people matter. And that was one of the things that stuck out for me with Jack, is the importance of making sure that all of these stories are seen as a collective human-made and ecological and social and political and economic crises moment that any of us could face at any minute. And there's no like, somewhere over there, some poor person is going to deal with something. This at some point has the ability to potentially impact all of us. So this is an our, us, we conversation of how do we start preparing as communities of place, grow more resilience, understand how we need to build infrastructure to cooperate ahead of time, become more prepared and agile as communities. How do we respond better in the midst of crises? How do we rally? How do we support? How do we give actual resourcing? As someone like Kevin is so brilliant, it's not just a handout, it's about helping capable people to rebound. They are the community leaders, they're skilled, capable people. They're not handout crises, like, here, I'll give you, some rice. Okay, you're good. Now go rebuild. But how do we help those people continue to be the leaders they are and the community members they are as they recalibrate? And then how do we come in and rebuild after the math? And what opportunities exist? Here we're talking about civic infrastructure and built environment. How do we have the opportunity to reimagine our built environments that are more ecologically savvy, more just, more equitable, more resilient as we rebuild after these various crises that strike? So it's just a really complicated and fascinating and dynamic conversation. And I'm going to hand it back to Shivani to see about guiding the conversation to hearing some more voices and thoughts, because I don't know that there's an answer, but I think a lot of you here are actively working on some point or all of that spectrum, trying to see what we can do to shore up and prepare and better resource communities that are affected by these, various issues. So Shivani, I'm going to hand it back to you and see if you can help guide and invite some other voices to join us today. And thank you, Jack and Bahati and Kevin, for sharing very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jamaica. Okay, so let's pop into the discussion component of this. And I thought that one way we might take this conversation forward is to maybe discuss amongst us solutions that we know have sort of worked and also why, right? So for instance, if you think about Afghanistan right now, there are multiple reports of people who have volunteered, women who have volunteered to educate women via the internet for girls who have access to internet. So they're holding these secret classes online. And it was really cool. The New York Times actually did a piece on how there was like this underground, there's a whole underground education industry that is currently running to educate girls and young women in Afghanistan right now. Sometimes they sort of do their whole, get into all of their Islamic attire, and then they leave the house and they're going to see a friend or somebody far away, but really what they're doing is going into someone's living room, and an educated woman is actually teaching them, and that's their idea of school. And they recognize that if they get found, they'd be in a lot of danger, but that's a risk they're willing to take. Similarly, in India, there are a lot of instances of teachers who volunteer by teaching children under like flyovers and stuff, because these are kids who don't have access to proper public education. And what all of these people share is an understanding that education is absolutely key to sort of lift each other and themselves out of poverty. So I think that there are all of these kids, all of these not just kids, but also young women who are living in these circumstances, and they recognize that it's poverty that holds them where they are. And so they will risk a lot to get an education to enable themselves to get themselves and their families out of those circumstances. So that's one instance. So I now invite you guys to maybe share ideas and solutions that you have seen work or know of working somewhere, and also why you think that that might be a good solution where it's applied.
I'll talk. Yes, when I hear flooding, there are ways to catch the water in a watershed and slow it and sink it down. It's going to be a combination of check dams, contour lines, where you basically ditches that are all the same level, so the water gets stopped. And bioswales, different things. There's a website you can go to called waterholisticwest.com. I'll put it in the chat. And there are 2 free books you can download there. It'll talk about different ways to slow down water and sink it into the earth, but in such a way that it comes out slowly and later and can greatly mitigate flooding. So I'll put that website into the chat. And there you can also look on the internet, just look up A-frames, contour lines, and it's very simple. It's 3 sticks and a string. You get that and some shovels, and you might be able to protect some of, you can protect, you can slow down and reduce the amount of water that's going to get there. And at the same time, it's building up it's making the land more resilient. It's getting water in so that if you have drier lands or lands that need a little more water, lands that have been degraded, it can get water back in the ground so things can start growing. So I'll just put my email or the website in the chat.
Thank you, Russ.
You
Kevin.
bet.
One of the things that I keep thinking about, and we spend a lot of time talking about, we can use this example across the spectrum, right? Like in Ukraine right now, you have a ton of resource that flows in. It usually comes in from the top, from big agencies, from, let's say, nation states, the United States, EU. That money's coming in. And I always imagine, rather, the majority of conversations are like, oh, these net resources never go to where they want to go, where it's really needed. The communities never get it. It's all corrupt, blah, blah, blah. And that's true. I'm not going to deny it. But then I think one of the tools that we've been playing with is how do we work on like a waterfall theory? So there's a lot of resource coming in, and what you're trying to do, and Jamaica touched on this in the opening session a little bit, but it's almost like translation services. The work that Jack or Bahati were sharing about, blessings on you for the life you've lived and the courage that's given you, and the real experience to be able to stand up, not just for your own people, but for people around the world who suffer from displacement. And I think, for me, the experience of that time and time again is like, oh, well, these are friends who I want to help connect with those resources. And I don't know always the right way to do it, right? I'm not a funder or a fundraiser. I'm not a grant maker. I don't have a pocket full of cash to distribute, but I've worked inside those systems just enough to know that they're accessible and we can tap into them. And I know a lot of the folks who work inside those agencies. And so because we're talking a little bit about this kind of interagency collaboration, there's two things that I would just pull, two threads I want to pull on. One is obviously, there's institutional concept of agency. So agency in that framework means an entity, an institution, a government or whatever. When we talk about those things, just remember those are all people. Those are human beings. And so the real trick tends to be finding an empathetic ear, finding the person who's ready to listen. And as a very dear friend of mine, Liana, said to me a few months ago, find the people who are ready and excited to collaborate with you. And the ones who don't listen, just keep moving. Like it's not worth trying to convince someone to listen to you. Rather, just find the people who are already chanting the same chant, because that chorus effect allows for collaboration. The other thing that I love about this word is, for those of us who've worked in development or recovery, we hear the word capacity a lot, and capacity building, teach a man to fish, which I'll just say right now is bullshit, because people already know how to fish. Like there's no white guy from the US who's going to teach a community in South America how to fish. Bullshit, So what we're really talking about is capacity, is agency, right? Agency is a very different thing. Agency is like permission, and sometimes it's permission from the government, or sometimes it's just, like I think of a young child who has a dream, like a dream to get off the couch and not be, just watching TV. They want to do something in the world, and all they need is like somebody to go, hey, get off the couch, you can do this, and when we talk about interagency, imagine that every one of these little face boxes here on this screen is an agency. Each of you has agency. And so then the question is, how do we interagency with each other? Who wants to interagency together? How do we do this, And, I think Bahati touched on this, this number, so I'll just throw this in there too. But we passed 100 million displaced globally. So this means not just refugees, but internally displaced. So imagine Northern California fires. We still have, Paradise. We have 3,000 families still displaced 4 years later. So even though we're the most resourced country in the world, we don't take care of our people, and it's the same. It's a mentality. And so the reason that's important, why? For 30 years, we were at 5% growth. This year, we passed 10% growth annually in the first 2 months. This problem, if it continues like this, we have 1 in 75 people is displaced currently. In 50 years, we would be 1 in 7. That means that of this little conversation we're having right now, 3 of us would be displaced. which we're already kind of there because I think we have at least 3 displaced people in the room. But my point is, that's the pivot. And so the invitation becomes, we need to get everybody involved in the game, which I think Elliot and Global Unity, there's many people who are working on these kinds of obviously open future. So that's it. I don't want to hold too long, but just.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so I'll just quickly pop in and say, so we've discussed sharing of resources, which I agree is absolutely key. There's resources aren't equally distributed, and certainly not everybody has access to resources. Sometimes it's a matter of just being inspired to get up. Other times it's a matter of just literally not being able to access a resource for miles and miles. So sharing of resources, of course, key. But yes, collaboration, which sort of lends to the idea that we need to make it so that people recognize that that this is an opportunity for all of us to sort of come together and build the kind of communities we want to see. So yes, indeed, if you change the conversation from, oh, they're coming from there and taking our jobs, to, oh my goodness, we really need people to come into this country and work so we can care for our elderly in this aging population, there's a big difference in sort of how the conversation would be received, which is currently, for instance, like the conversation in the US versus in Canada, where in the US, they're like, oh my God, here we go again. They're coming for our jobs and our wages and all of that. And in Canada, they're like, oh my gosh, we're not moving in people fast enough because our people are aging and no one's making any money for this aging population. So certainly there is interagency collaboration, but also it's the messaging, we've got to get the accurate information out there. Education is key. People, and I mean from all the way from the start to the end. But yes, on that very same note, can we continue to talk about other, I think, ideas or concepts outside of autonomy and dignity, which are the better known ones, that we know will probably translate well into scalable solutions over time. And thank you, Jack, for raising your hand.
I see Jack and I see John. Jack, do you want to jump in first, and then John will give you a chance to jump in?
No, maybe John can go first. I talked, so maybe give him a chance.
Oh, thanks, Jack. John, do you want to go ahead, and then we'll hand it back to Jack?
Yes, now that I've unmuted. I wanted to point out that all of these displaced people, many of them are displaced because of climate, landscape degradation, and political consequences of landscape degradation. And all of them potentially are solutions to that problem, even in the environments to which they have had to move. Refugees are often put into degraded landscapes because the land is cheap, not valuable, and you can just put these people away there. And then you ship in huge amounts of institutionalized food packets and rice, and it's not a happy situation. But in fact, rice becomes carbon-rich deposits, and land restoration potentially improves the environment of the host country and of the refugee camp. And potentially, I think, picking up on the last point, recognizing that all of these people have the most to gain, the least to lose, and are huge resources, as well as huge opportunities for collaboration and empowerment, is, I think, going to be an important strategy. If 1 in 7 people is available and seeking meaningful work, and 70% of the planet needs restoration, and the restoration is not that hard, but it does require real work, there's a real opportunity, and a real opportunity to think of displaced people as leaders, collaborators, and change makers improving their local environments, rather than simply just taxes on the system.
Actually, thank you, John. That is absolutely on point. There is it's outside of the moral, component of just basically leaving people to fend for themselves in god-awful situations. there is a massive economic cost. We've literally got millions of people on the move, a good chunk of whom are capable doctors, lawyers, educators, construction workers, plumbers, electricians. I mean, these are all people who would very much prefer to care for themselves and their own families. And yet we waste these as resources because we toss them aside or toss them in camps and treat them like a burden on the system, when in fact all they want to do is contribute to the system and care for their families. So I'm so glad that actually came up, because I think that is absolutely key. Jack.
Yeah, thank you so much. First, I want to put it out that we must acknowledge that we're coming from different backgrounds. So when we are talking about or addressing the issues of climate change, we really need to acknowledge that. For example, where I come from, one, there are limitations, and I believe education is very key as far as this is concerned, whereby we need to start actually inflicting knowledge about the status of the planet into young children, and that is what I do, because our education system, let me say, it's compromised, for lack of a better word, whereby people or children are taught, about success, being in life. I mean, being successful in life, and success to them means exhausting the nature or exhausting, resources from the environment. So I believe that education is very key. If we can start by, raising campaigns or doing campaigns whereby the issues of climate change are actually considered into, various syllabuses that children are learning, such that they grow with that, knowing the state of the planet. Number two, I will also want to bring the aspect of translation, whereby, and that is what I meant by saying that we are coming from different, backgrounds. There's a lot of opaqueness in terms of, the knowledge about climate change. When I think of that old woman in the village where I come from, who cannot speak English, who cannot speak the major languages of the world that are majorly used to address the issues of climate change. For example, in my community, I will give an example whereby there was a time I was in the market, trying to educate people and all that. I have my placard on issues of climate change. And then a person approaches me and asks me about whether I can sell for him climate change. So to him, he thought I was selling something. So that will mean the level of ignorance. They don't know what is happening. And again, these are people that are not learned. You don't expect them to speak English or to understand English or Portuguese or French, the biggest languages where the work around climate, action has been, used to communicate that. So I will prefer, and that is something that I've started doing, maybe translation of this information, into local languages that people can understand, not specifically English. And not much has been done around that. So it's climate issues are only addressed in English, French, bigger languages, but we forget, other languages that, people will understand better. So I think that is also a very important aspect that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. Actually, on the matter of education, perhaps we can bring Bahati back into the conversation. Bahati, you came out of some really difficult circumstances and built an educational institution for other children, so that they wouldn't have to, have the sort of childhood that you did, focusing again on education primarily. Can you tell us, and by the way, Ceuta was recognized as one of the best educational institutions of Africa, the entire continent. So it's really just incredible that you can come from what you came from and then put up an institution that is so valuable and successful, where it works. Certainly it has to have worked in your favor that you came from the communities that you were helping to educate. But can you tell us a little bit about what you found to be key in sort of building a solution, if you will, to a massive pressing problem around displacement in your area?
Thank you, Shivani. I think previous speakers have already touched on this. I think for us, for Ceuta, we were pressed by the situation. We are not like superstars who understood the education system around, as Jack just said, that we inherited our education system from our colonizers. But for us, it's not just education. I think, how do we help our young people, the local people, understand that they have the power to change their own situations? And I think that's where Kevin mentioned that people already know how to fish. People know already they have problems, and people have ideas about the possible solutions, but they don't have the resources to address some of these key problems and challenges. I think for us is to help these young people understand, number one, we are in a community, and this community has raised us, and we have the responsibility to work together to address some of these problems. For example, we realize, yes, Jack just mentioned our education was, we inherited this education. Basically, it's not practical to address some of these problems. And for Ceuta, we are like, okay, we are affected by these conflicts. That's number one. How do we help these young people to understand that conflict is not a good thing? We are working with all these young people from the South Sudan, from the Congo, from Burundi, from Rwanda, all these young people. How do we as a community move forward regardless of our differences? Could be religious, political, whatsoever. So we are helping these young people understand no matter what we do, we are a community, and you have to find ways of addressing our problems in a peaceful means than resorting to conflict. So we are coupling our formal education with peace building, peace education to these young people, entrepreneurship programs where these young people can come up with their own ventures, their own solutions. Actually, the young people who design our website, Ceuta's website, our former students, our CEO is a former student, and we have around, I think, 15 young organizations started by our own students finding local solutions to local problems. So I think the problem we're having right now is how do we meaningfully engage local communities affected by these issues and support them and where they are. And that's why I was able to share some of the resources on the positions Salam Access Ceuta we are standing on meaningful engagement and participation of people who are affected by the conflict. I wrote a piece which also I shared, having refugees on EXCOM, which is led by states where they are making decisions on behalf of refugees, even when these states have already broken, they already failed these refugees, and now they are loitering around the world. And so I think finding ways to support these local solutions, I think will be key. And that's number one. And that's why we are coming up with the ideas on how local initiatives can find meaningful resources for them to do the work. And for organizations, international organizations, when we go into these communities, what is our approaches? How are we supporting these people? Our partnership equitable for them to be able to lead these solutions without us being too influential and impose our solutions. Kevin mentioned that there's no you're going to teach someone, who already knew the lake, already knows where the best corner of the lake, where to find the fish, and you say you're going to teach him how to fish. So I think these are some of the most interesting, I think, concepts we need to look at. But also the other big piece I would think about was investing in initiatives that are geared towards preventing conflict. I think where there are human beings, there always be conflicts, and I think finding best ways to invest even before these conflicts happen, I think will be key. I think these are all big issues, and I think we can all work together as people in a global village to address some of them. Back to you, Shivani.
I think it's amazing how you are endlessly positive. So actually, this brings to mind something that I've been thinking about recently, and I think it's a really valid concern, and it's going to become a bigger concern as this conversation continues, and millions more will be on the move, and there'll be disasters. So there's a need for humanitarian aid as well as development solutions, right? How do you think we can handle the growing, what's called compassion fatigue? Right? So every day you wake up, right? And there's a new crisis in a new part of the world. Actually, today, when I was at work, one of my colleagues, she's the advocacy officer for Haiti and also for Nigeria and also for Ethiopia. And so she hasn't slept in weeks, right? And I was just like, how do we do this? How do we wake up every day and just, there are stories and stories about all the news is about, we need aid, we need the world to come for us, we need to support each other. How do we get past this part where people just get to a point where they're like, well, I don't know what to do, that everybody needs help and I don't know how to get there. How do you guys, does anyone have any thoughts on this? I'm so curious to hear, because I think this is something we're going to have to increasingly deal with.
I'll leave space for voices, so I'm going to invite someone else to jump in too after I share this little bit, but I'll say that this is something I spend my time on often and know that I have the privilege and good fortune of hearing stories every day of very compelling, capable, beautiful, devoted, brave people who are doing the incredible work on the ground to restore and rebuild and renew and lean forward and heal and give. And so I think that I have a perspective, because every day I'm like, okay, keep going, because if that person keeps going and that person keeps going, like if we keep going, the groundswell of this sort of building of the peoples of place responding almost like an immune response system to the planetary crisis. If we keep going and keep building and keep helping each other and stay buoyant, that's, that's the only way forward, is to keep recognizing these stories. So I guess I'll say story for me has been one of the most powerful tools that we have, not only education, but story, and connecting to each other's stories and understanding our own story within this sort of collective narrative. And how do we guide and shape a narrative that tells of the solutions and the incredible efforts and the heroic people on the ground, and like these things that aren't told in mainstream media, these things that I happen to know because I have the good fortune every day of doing the work I do, but so many people never see and they don't know, and these stories don't get told. So it's one of the things happening later in the series on Thursday. We have a session on leveraging story and media to drive collective action and change, to help claim the narrative that's going to, I think, help motivate and compel and create a sense of connection where there's been apathy and despair and separation, intentionally an agenda to keep us compliant, that keeps us disconnected from each other's stories and the common story that is a diverse, unique, dynamic story, but is also one of here we all are, all impacted and impacting the existing constraint. So I just feel like story is one of those powerful things, stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell our children, the stories we tell about each other, the stories we tell to each other, the stories we share in common, the stories that surprise us, that unite us, that divide us, but in ways that help us understand how valuable differences and diversity are. I just feel like we need more capacity for these stories to come to light, to have a voice, because I think that to hearts that are exhausted and tired, I guess I'll say this last bit, that my understanding is that you can be motivated by fear and you can be motivated by love. And when you're motivated by fear, it will drive you to act. It will drive you to change. You will show up for fear, but it's exhausting and it'll only take you so far. And you will always hit a dead end where you can no longer be motivated directly by fear and be responsive and reactive to fear. But if you're motivated by love, if you're motivated because you care, if you're motivated because you actually feel the plight of the next generations, you feel your own heart connected as a as a living being on a living planet, you know, whatever it is that you feel love and connection to, we will show up for again and again. I can tell you as a mama bear, if you love something, you will show up, you will devote, you will find energy reserves you didn't know you had. You will find, you know, new spaces to move into. You will be compelled to move. And it is an infinite source. It's inexhaustible. It will never fail you. Again and again, if you return to love and have that be why we motivate and compel each other, we can do anything. So for me, it's about continuing to bring forward stories of love and make sure that's what we're calling to action, and that's what's motivating our direction forward, and that we in some ways stop telling narratives of fear and divisiveness and instead showcase the stories of solutions, incredible courage, caring about each other, caring about what we love, caring about future generations, and let that start to sort of change the motivation to show up again and again and again when you're exhausted by the story of grief and fear and trauma. And it isn't to ignore it. I just want to say this one last piece and hand the floor back over. I don't think it's to ignore the trauma in any way. I think it's to love the trauma. I think it's to acknowledge how heartbroken and grievous so many people are, and that isn't getting dealt with. And then when that's not dealt with, we act from that place of exhaustion and fear and trauma. So it's like, don't ignore that, but find something within that that you love, even if it's your own breath, you know, even if it's your own, like whatever is the thing that loves, because that's going to have to be what motivates us to continue to be inexhaustible in the amount of effort that this will take to do this incredible shift that's required of us at this time. So it's my 2 cents to your answer. It's what motivates me every day, is I don't get to give up on my children. I don't get to give up on them. I don't get to look them in the eye and be like, oh, well, good luck. And I don't get to give up on Jack's village children. I don't get to give up on your children. Find a way to find something you love and make that be what motivates you to keep going, you know. But I hand the floor back to the center.
That's great. That's so heartwarming. I'd love to hear. There was this tiny discussion going on in the chat about how, which is certainly how I do it, even though, I mean, there are days when it's exhausting, but yeah, to focus on what you can do, and are you doing everything you can do? Because that part you can control, right? There's so much, there's always going to be stuff that's out of our control, but I know that I started sleeping better when I started doing things about what was, and this whole thing for me kicked off after, you know, the war in Syria began. I was still in New York back then, and I remember I couldn't sleep. There was this one New York Times page that is burned in my brain. It was just, and it was the first time that they gassed their own people, that Assad gassed his own people, and the whole front half of the New York Times was just dead babies. And that image is burned in my brain. And I couldn't sleep for weeks, months after that. Eventually I would give up and start a whole new career in a whole new place. And, you know, and I went and did, I still do humanitarian aid. I work in development. I do everything I can. And honestly, I sleep so much better for it. And yeah, there are a lot of babies I'm not getting to. There are a lot of children I'm not getting to, but you know what? I'm doing everything in my power to do what I can. And that's what helps me. But I'd love to hear more. I'd also love to hear what this looks like on a policy level. Like, how do we reach populations? How do we keep them from getting disengaged and bubbling themselves away from this barrage of bad news? Gregory.
I love our conversation, and hello everybody, and what a privilege to hear your stories and feel your feelings, every one of you who've spoken. And I keep coming back to the thread, including what you just said, Shivani, about the understory is to develop our own inner capacity for feeling and to expand our capacity to feel a whole range of feelings and then act from what we know is right inside. And it's so simple, but it's so complex, especially when we're faced with the trauma and the pain of our own lives and our loved ones and what you see in the news and all of that. But if we could all just take a moment, take a quick breath right now, just pause and feel. Feel the inside of us together. Take another breath. And the ability to feel that and watch that expand, to feel the actual, we're all feeling the same thing, enables us to do what one of you wrote in the chat, to just take that one act, to listen to someone who's in pain and take a little longer with them, or to not speak when they need to share. But then one of the things that I found that was really insightful about what I think Bahati or one of you were saying about education, and when you were saying, Jack, about how few people know the languages of these global challenges. One of the more challenging things that I've experienced is in rooms of highly educated people that don't want to know beyond what they know. And that doesn't require necessarily education, but deepening relationship and listening to what is important to those who don't want to listen. Because there's that scared child underneath, that if we all knew that we all have those feelings and relate more readily to those who are insensitive, then we'll find the sensitivity, and that becomes common emotion that creates common bond. And I feel that's what I feel I've learned today from listening to all of you. And I just thought or felt compelled to say what I have, because it's perhaps the most important thing I've learned today, is just to listen that everyone shares this same capacity and also the same pathway. So I just honor you and thank all of you who are organizing, of course, Jamaica and Katie, to all. Yeah.
Thank you, Gregory. That was lovely, actually. Okay, so, I feel like this is one of those conversations that we could go on for days and we would still not solve this global crisis. I mean, here we are. But in the spirit of doing everything we can do, I'm just going to maybe invite the folks who haven't spoken up, and you don't have to turn on your cameras if you wouldn't like to. So, if in a word to 5, if you had to summarize what you thought was a solution to some of our displacement crises, what would that be? So for instance, one of the solutions I have heard today, and I personally champion as well, is education. And I invite everybody to go. Let's get everybody in on this. Hi, Taib.
Hi. Well, the reason I felt like I needed to say something, because I do think education is paramount and really important. And I worry that there's so many different ways that we're in an age of anti-intellectualism, where people go on tribalism or aided theories about identity and race that don't have anything to do with the deep need for pragmatic solutions for all of the climate refugees that are coming in very near future. Recently, I went to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for a political event, and it was funny to me because I've had the same feeling when I've gone to Cleveland, Ohio, Gary, Indiana, where there's so many cities that were designed for an additional 1 million or 2 million people. And because they are in Rust Belt cities, they've had a decline in population. But these spaces are dying while other people are deeply in need of space for small businesses, for communities, for housing. Right? So like Pennsylvania is a very complicated state. We call it Pennsyltucky because Philadelphia theoretically is not a part of Pennsylvania if you as a Philadelphia, right? And there's no dialogue with the other diverse part of the state in Pittsburgh. But when I think about education, I have to think about all the practitioners involved in the built environment. I said to Jamaica the other day that there are as many professional ball players in the NBA as there are African-American women architects. As a real estate developer, every building needs an external and an internal architect, all right? And there are a lot of people who go to school for architecture, but don't actually get the ability to be practicing architects. In the US, African-American women are killing all numbers in terms of starting new businesses. But, you know, only 3% of venture capital to date has been distributed to women and people of color. Right? So I know a lot of people who are very well educated, but still have these virtual barriers to being practitioners in their field. So I do think education is important, but what happens when you go through a system of education that still does not put you in a space of power to have dominion over the future of your community? So those are just some feelings that I thought of when you were talking about education as a solution. I think education, lifelong learning is incredibly important. There are a lot of people who were indoctrinated in urban planning in the 1970s with broken ideas about our infrastructure. But if you were to talk to them about some of the progressive projects that all of you are working on, it would be as if you were talking about science fiction, because people are stuck in their thinking, even in spaces of academia, about what is right or wrong or what works within the capital models to get things built. So I don't know if that answered any questions, but it gave me a lot to feel.
Lifelong learning is another something we didn't hear yet. And yes, indeed, lifelong learning, right? Because gosh, we see that all the time. But I love it. Can we have some more, please?
Yeah, Elliot, jump in.
I think, and this applies to some of what Taib was speaking to, but what we need is cartography. We need to map out what resources are there, where there are needs, where are people displaced, and I think it was to John's point earlier, within the people who are displaced, what are the skill sets that are available? If we just knew what was available and what was needed and could do matchmaking, even to know, a mapping out of what funding opportunities are available, because folks spoke in the previous session to, or I think Kevin spoke to strategies around funding, but a big part of that for so many who are especially not plugged into those spaces is even knowing who to speak to, let alone once he had strategies for once you have those conversations, but so many folks don't even know where to begin looking. And so I feel like cartography or mapping things out is actually a public good to make the data available to know where resources are, and that can apply in many different ways.
That's a solid solution, actually. That's like an actual solution. I love it. Like, here's an idea, guys. Why don't we do this? That would be great.
I would just say, Elliot, that's exactly what we've been doing in the Ukraine response. Like, we have our team is on the ground there working with community-based organizations. We give out, $2,000, $3,000 grants, very small facilitated grants. We go out with these community-based organizations, we document what they're doing, we go back to the UN system and introduce them to other larger NGOs. And in that way, it's really, again, it's that capacity recognition and then agency and connection. So it's really just very simple, like, hey, this group is out there, and the UN agencies and all these other folks who work in them, they want to know about the community-based organizations, but their institutions are so freaking tied to a desk that they've forgotten how to do what was really the original impetus of what we call humanitarian work, which is not done at a desk and not done in a meeting. It's done in the field, that you go out and you actually just meet with a community and help them out, see what they need, lift with them, So yeah, cartography as opposed to trying to design from a distance. Love that.
Thank you, Kevin. Elizabeth, I see your hand, and maybe we take just like one more after that, and then we're going to wrap for this particular session. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to kind of give a shout out for what the Open Future Coalition is doing in terms of really being able to gather data and the metrics of what we're doing and how it's working. And so part of what I'm seeing is together creating a universal code that can be just a data code, like creating data sets around the work that we're doing, that we're speaking the same language, at least in terms of coding our work somehow, so that we can be feeding this into the cartography in a way that really makes sense, speaking a universal language in terms of where we are, who we are, what watersheds we're in, what projects we're working on, what, and then being able to really analyze that data as a group, like that we have that accessible in open source. Yeah. So just wanted to add that in terms of really, and my model is following the language of water in terms of this code. And so that's one of the things I'm working on, and would like to find allies in terms of that, because coding is not my natural language, but I see it. I'm not a native speaker, but need help in that translation to get something that really works for everybody across the planet. And I see that code is really, it's like music in a way, that it is a universal language that can supersede culture if we can agree on the specific structure and data set.
Definitely, I agree. We didn't discuss much around data, but definitely data, not just ethically owned and, well, not just ethically sourced, but also data that is owned by the people and the communities that we gather the data from, which is not what currently happens, is it? So that's another big conversation on the side, but yes, data is definitely a big one. I think Jamaica, I think this is my cue to hand it back to you.
You did it, Shivani. Well, we are going to wrap this particular session, but I feel like I'm sure that some of you who were here in listening mode, I long to hear your voices as well. And so for us, this is an ongoing dialogue. This is an essential and pressing issue and constructive issues. And I'm honored that we had the opportunity to chat a bit today. I know we just scratched the surface. Bahati and Jack particularly, thank you. I feel like I long to know more and understand deeper what you're working with in your communities, but I'm really honored to have the opportunity, everybody here, to just have this incredibly important conversation together. I don't know that we're going to solve it all at once in 1 hour and a half session, but I think it's this that is the path to the way forward. And Shivani, to that end, thank you for the Pathfinders work that you do, and Kevin for United Refuge. And yeah, for everyone here joining us in these sessions, obviously we'll make the recording in the chat available. And for those of you staying on with our day one of the forum for civic infrastructure, our next session up is going to be a global roundtable of demonstration projects in civic infrastructure. I think I'm excited to sort of hear some of these really innovative projects, some of them more, sort of civic infrastructure and existing built environments, and some of them sort of water remediation in indigenous villages, like a whole smattering of how are we looking at this concept of a more equitable and just and innovative and balanced built environment. What does that mean? So stick around for that conversation on this same channel. And for anybody not joining the next session, thank you so much for joining this one and whatever else you pop into over the course of the next 3 days. We're really looking forward to seeing your faces again. And we will be, like I said, saving the chat and the recording to follow up. And feel free to put, last minute, any final resources, put your email in the chat, connect with each other. I'm going to go ahead and sort of stop the recording and power down the room for a minute to take a little break before we start the next session. But thank you so much for being a part of this, whether as a listener or sharing your perspectives. And again, Shivani, thank you for moderating. We'll call that a good wrap on this session for now and hope to continue dialogue with you. Really great to meet all of you. Be well and thank you.